Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen, wa salatu wa salamu ala Sayyidil Anbiya'i wal Mursaleen wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'een. So let's get started right away, inshallah. The first topic that I wanted to talk about is something very personal to me. I don't come from a very religious background, and when I did come towards Islam, I was in New York, and the thing about New York is depending on which masjid you go, you get a different brand of Islam. They don't just call themselves Muslim, they have another label next to them. We are this kind of Muslim, that kind of Muslim, this school of thought, that school of thought, this jama'ah, that jama'ah. There are these different names. And we're not going to be naming names in this discussion, but certainly it was the case that each of those groups, some more accepting of others than others, some of them are very exclusive. If you're not part of us, then you're not even in proper Islam. You're misguided and all those people are going to hell, etc., etc. Right? And their majority of their energy was spent talking about how they're right and everybody else is wrong. And yet other groups, their emphasis was on some completely different thing, some other piece of Islam. And they said, if you don't emphasize on this, if this is not what you're about, then how are you even Muslim? Right? So each of these groups, or each of these kinds of identities, they have their own very distinct, very strong brand of Islam. And this is not just a problem in New York City, it's actually a problem across the Ummah. Right? So a lot of times when I travel, I get asked what kind of Muslim I am. And all I can say is the weird kind. I don't know what else I can, I don't know what to tell you. Because you need to put some kind of label there, right? And it is, alhamdulillah, like for many Muslims, this is not a problem. They've been raised in a village, everybody's the same, and they're not going to see a Muslim that looks different or has a different school of thought. But you know, we're in a cosmopolitan world now. You guys are living in cities that are international, and people are coming and they're praying in salah together that don't belong to the same school of thought. No two people are holding hands in the same place, right? And whether or not people are sitting there for the 10 minutes for the dua after the salah or the adhkar salah, some people are getting up and leaving, and the people who are sitting there are getting offended by the guys that are leaving. And the guys who are leaving are saying, these guys are so confused, why are they still sitting there? So there's all of these dynamics that can create unnecessary tension between Muslims, right? And it can create a kind of resentment, mistrust. The fact that they accept Allah and His Messenger is good enough for me. The rest is with their own journey, and inshallah they grow in it, etc. But I wanted to get you guys' thoughts too, and your experiences are different from mine. So I wanted to hear from you, how you've dealt with sectarianism and where you think we can go as an ummah to get beyond it, inshallah.
So just to keep the conversation a little bit more informal and on a personal level, because I think that's the vibe that you're going for. Islam was demonstrated as being something you fight about. And so a lot of times when I'm asked a question by students or community members, because we talk a lot about community, all of us do, and kind of our vision and perspective on community. So they ask me, where does your perspective or vision on community come from? So I end up telling them that I grew up in a community that was very divisive. So I just decided to look back at that entire experience and note it down as what not to do in a community.
So, when I was learning, my formula became, if I'm listening to some shaykh or something, and I'm very old, so I listen to cassette tapes. And so when I listen to them, if they're in their tapes, they were talking about how misguided or deviated those people are, I stopped listening. Like, I don't have the time to learn about what's wrong. I'd rather learn something that's right, kind of thing, There was just far too much energy spent on, here are the 8 groups that are going to hell. Like, okay, can we talk about the group that's going to heaven? Like, so, Omar?
So I think that we can't be shallow about this, we have to be realistic about it. Historically speaking, most calls for pluralism in any faith tradition have actually failed miserably because they were too superficial. They ignored just realities that were going to always be there. And instead of confronting issues at the core, they were just general calls, very shallow calls, very happy-go-lucky calls of let's all. It was a very fluffy call for pluralism. So I think we have to be very honest. Number one thing that we can agree upon, first and foremost, and it's sad that we even have to mention this in this day and age, is that you don't actually become violent against any other group of Muslims. Any group of people, period, over theological differences. I mean, Ali ibn Abi Talib radiallahu ta'ala anhu was killed by the Khawarij. He was killed by one of, this violent group that the Prophet ﷺ said would resurface in every single generation in some way, shape or form. Basically people that make takfir of other Muslims and people that will kill people and so on and so forth. But when he was asked whether we should consider them non-Muslims, he said, إِخْوَانَّا قَدْ بَغَوْا عَلَيْنَا.